Hugo Cabret, a 12-year-old kid in Paris in 1931, lives with his widowed father, a gentle and dedicated master clockmaker. Hugo's father brings him to watch movies and especially like Georges Melly's flicks. Melly is a film pioneer and historical person. Hugo's father is burned alive in a museum fire, and Hugo is carried away by his uncle Claude, an alcoholic watchmaker in charge of the clocks at Paris's Gare Montparnasse railway station. Hugo lives between the station's walls, keeping the clocks running, collecting food, and assisting his father with his most ambitious project, fixing a damaged automaton, a mechanical man who is meant to write with a pen. Hugo, certain that the automaton bears a message from his father, goes to great efforts to repair it. Hugo takes mechanical components from the station in order to fix the automaton, but he is apprehended by Georges Melly, a merchant who produces, sells, and repairs toys. Melly lures Hugo into a trap with a toy mouse, then steals his notebook, which contains his notes and plans for repairing the automaton. Hugo insists on the return of his notebook, and Melly, who is highly interested in the notebook, yells at him, calling him a thief. Hugo takes off. Hugo is pursued by the train inspector, a disabled gendarme, and his hound dog, who pushes customers out of the way. Hugo follows Melly to his residence to retrieve the notepad and meets Georges' goddaughter Isabelle, a girl his age. She persuades him to return home and pledges to assist him. The following day, Melly offers Hugo some ashes, referring to them as the notebook's remnants, but Isabelle assures him that the notebook was not burned. Finally, Melly offers that Hugo may reclaim the notebook by working for him until he has paid for everything he took from the business. Hugo works at a toy shop and fixes the automaton in his spare time, but it is still lacking one part, a heart-shaped key. Hugo introduces Isabelle to films that her godfather has never allowed her to view. They sneak into a silent movie theater without purchasing a ticket. Hugo is first skeptical of Isabelle and attempts to abandon her, but Isabelle turns out to be the key to the automaton. When they use the key to activate the automaton, it draws a movie sequence. Hugo recalls the film that his father always said was the first film he ever saw, Voyage to the Moon. They learn that the automaton's drawing is signed with Isabelle's godfather's name and take it to her house for an explanation. Hugo shows Georges' wife Jean the drawing done by the automaton in the Melly's home, but she refuses to tell them anything and makes them hide in a room when Georges returns home. Isabelle and Hugo discover a secret cabinet while hiding and unintentionally release photos and narrative boards of Georges' works just as Georges and Jean approach the room. Georges is despondent and feels deceived. Hugo, on the other hand, befriends the bookshop owner, who assists Hugo and Isabelle in their hunt for a book on the history of film. They are astonished to learn that the author, René Tabard, claims Georges Melly perished during World War I. When they attempt to figure out why this happened, Monsieur Tabard enters and the children inform him that Melly is still alive. Tabard reveals himself to be a fan of Melly's films, owning a copy of Voyage to the Moon. Hugo, Isabelle, and Tabard arrive at Georges' house, but Jean does not greet them, urging them to leave before her husband wakes up. When it is discovered that Jean was one of Georges' film actors, she accepts their offer to screen Voyage to the Moon. While they are viewing the movie, Georges enters and recounts how he got into making movies, pioneered special effects, and lost confidence in cinema when World War I began. He became bankrupt and was forced to sell his pictures for the value of the celluloid film material, which was melted down and used to produce items such as buttons and shoe heels. To make ends meet, he started a toy store. He believes the automaton he built was destroyed in the museum fire and that nothing of his life's work remains. Hugo returns to the station to get the automaton, but he is surrounded by the station inspector and his dog. He flees, runs to the top of the clock tower, and hides by climbing out onto the clock's hands. He snatches the automaton and bolts for the exit after the inspector has left, but he is caught by the inspector and the automaton is tossed on the train tracks. Hugo attempts to save it, but a train is approaching. Climbing onto the rails nonetheless, he is almost run over before the officer saves him and the robot and takes him into custody. Hugo begs the officer to let him leave, but Georges appears and says that Hugo is under his care. Finally, Georges gets recognized for his films, with Tabard announcing the recovery and restoration of 80 Melly's pictures. Georges expresses gratitude to Hugo for his acts and then asks the audience to follow his dreams. Hugo becomes Georges' apprentice, and Isabelle decides to pursue a career as a writer.